Hey everyone, I'm Rick Dougherty, host of Tall Guy Talks Travel, joined once again by my good friend and co-host Maz.
Hello, hello. Happy to be here.
So, it was really easy to get Maz to want to do this episode because we are talking about her favorite theme park, I believe, in the world, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, her favorite theme park in the world, Disney's Animal Kingdom. But we have a very specific purpose in today's conversation, and we are talking about whether the incarnation of Animal Kingdom, which we will have once the Tropical Americas section opens in the next few years, will be still the original concept of Animal Kingdom, or have they lost the plot a little bit with the theme park? And then, even if we think they have lost the plot, is that a bad thing? So, we're going to talk about all of that in today's episode. And we're going to move counterclockwise around the park. I want to start with Pandora, the world of Avatar, because if there's ever an area that is a little bit of a stretch, this is the one where they are stretching the most to try to get the Pandora Avatar theme into Animal Kingdom. They're focusing on conservation, they're focusing on the environment, but they're trying to shoehorn a very popular intellectual property. I'm actually not 100% sure it's as popular as everybody thinks, but that's a conversation for a whole nother episode. It is a popular land in this theme park. So, what do you think about Pandora specifically when talking about the theme of the park overall?
Yeah, I think it's definitely shoehorned in there. Um, and I think that it's one of those things that the Imagineers knew they were shoehorning. So you get instances of, especially in like Flight of Passage, you get instances of pre-show ride dialogue that's very clunky to be like, yeah, you're gonna ride the Ikran and hey, conservation. Hey, did you know conservation's important? Enjoy the ride. And you're like, oh, okay. So you really like wanted to make sure that somewhere this was said. But, that being said, it's a great land and I really enjoy it. And I think, yes, maybe you have to look a little harder at points for that theme to come in. But I think they did the best they could with what they had.
It doesn't look out of place when compared to the rest of the theme park. It was originally going to be Beastly Kingdom, which I think all of us agree probably would have been a cooler land, but it would
It
have
would
been still fantastical and it still would have been mythical creatures. So that does sort of fit as long as it still looks like Animal Kingdom. The fact that it's a little more fanciful is not that big of a deal. Like you said, it is a great land. It has quite possibly the best quick service, at least in any of the theme parks with Satuli. It has Flight of Passage, which is an amazing ride. It has Navi River Journey, which, if the line isn't too long and the animatronic is working, is definitely a worthy attraction. It's a nice, relaxing attraction, and it has that really cool animatronic. They had Joe Rohde, the Imagineer, work on this land before they got rid of him and kind of forced him to retire. I think because they wanted to tie it in to the rest of the park. They wanted to do the best job possible because the entire park was kind of his baby. So if they could have him work on this land, they could say they had his stamp of approval for it. So this is one of the areas where when we come back and talk about whether the land has when we come back and talk about whether the park has lost its way, this is going to be one of the places where we might have to take a look. But I do think on its own, just separating it from anything else. They did a pretty good job of getting the land right.
I fully agree. I think it flows really well in terms of transitionally when you're walking into and out of it in the park. They did a great job. It feels like Animal Kingdom. And, to set the record a bit early on, if we had gotten Beastly Kingdom, that would have been likely even less connected to a conservation theme. So it's just something to think about.
Although Joe Rody would have had the opportunity to connect that to a conservation theme as well. So he
Let's
probably
just
would
let
have
him do
done,
everything forever. Just let Joe Rody be in charge of everything.
well, letting him go is certainly a decision. And we have been talking about a future episode where we will probably discuss that decision more in depth. So if you take the almost secret walkway back to the Africa section, this one of the original lands, and this fits perfectly. It has Festival of the Lion King, which, okay, maybe isn't the biggest conservation message, but it focuses on the animals. It has the music that we all love from the Lion King. It is one of the best, just overall experiences in any of the Walt Disney World theme parks. And then the land is so incredibly themed. It's, you have Kilimanjaro Safari. This is the land that basically personifies this park.
Yes. I mean, really, the safari is Animal Kingdom. When you think about something being the iconic ride of that park, that is the safari. And getting to see the animals up close, getting to learn about the animals, I think is really important because, now suddenly these animals aren't just ideas or something you may see in more of a zoo setting, but you actually get to see them roaming. You get to really learn more about them. And I think that brings a connection to a lot of people that helps you really care about them and how they fare in the world. And I think it's very important.
And most importantly, when you're talking about conservation and appreciating these animals, when Maz and I were on the Gorilla Falls Trail in December of 2023, and we got to see a gorilla at the top of a very large tree, and he relieved himself. And that is the kind of thing that just personifies a theme park. And I think when Joe Rody was putting together Disney's Animal Kingdom, he was thinking of that exact moment. And boy, was that awkward with all the kids that were
Yeah,
around.
that's actually an animatronic. And it does that every half hour. No, I'm kidding. That would be wild. No pun intended.
And then we are going to move over to the section that has your favorite attraction in the park. Maybe it isn't the attraction that personifies the theme park, like Kilimanjaro Safari, but Expedition Everest. The first time that I ever went to Animal Kingdom, this was still being built. So I got to experience the park before Expedition Everest. Then you have the Maharaja Jungle Trek, which you get to see the tigers. They do a great job of having the tigers sort of in this old wreckage or these old ruins of a temple. And in the past, Cali River Rapids had much more of a conservation theme to it. They have sort of stripped that theming away from the ride unless you're really, really paying attention. So Asia might have sort of, with the advent of Expedition Everest and with Cali River Rapids moving away from that conservation theme, might not quite be focusing as much. Even how the show there keeps changing and is kind of weird. It was a bird show, and then it was a show with Russell and Doug from Up. And so Asia is kind of still on point, but maybe a little further away from the bullseye than it was when it was first created.
Yeah, and I think we can get into it further later, but I think this format is kind of what I expect to see out of Animal Kingdom moving forward. So I don't want to get too into that right now, but I do think that I mean, Asia still really works as a land. There's a lot of great stuff there. So, it is a great part of the park, and obviously I am very biased towards it because I do love Expedition Everest.
What was the number?
31.
Maz rode Expedition Everest 31 times in the same day. That day, I rode it with her 10 of those times,
Yeah, which is still a lot.
which is very much a lot.
It's a lot.
But you hit it 31 times, which is incredible. And it is a great ride. And I do think it fits in Animal Kingdom. And once again, when we talk about like Beastly Kingdom having the mythical animals, so having this mythical Yeti is a big deal, is really cool. Um, and I think that it still has you thinking about nature and conservation, maybe just in a different way, but you're definitely thinking about that part of the world, and they do a great job of telling the story of people trying to get to Everest through the queue. And now, obviously, when you ride it 31 times in a day, you're not focusing on the queue very much. But if you ride it twice in a day, you might pay attention to what's going on in the queue. And then they have the Finding Nemo musical, which is a
Mhm.
fine musical. I think they sort of try to hint on some themes in it, but really it's just there to throw another intellectual property into the mix. And then we are going to move over to what was Dino Land USA and is going to be turned into Tropical Americas. This is going to feature a carousel that is going to have different characters on the carousel. I believe they're going to be carved out of wood, if I'm not mistaken. And then there's going to be the house from Encanto. We are imagining they're going to focus on the kid who talks to animals. I would
That's
have
the
to think,
guess.
right.
Yeah, we
And
know it's a
then
dark ride and nothing else. So,
they're going to take Dinosaur and they are going to turn it into an Indiana Jones ride, which they have already said will be different than the one in Disneyland, presumably so they can focus more on animals and trying to fit it into the theme. But this is where I'm not sure how much damage this is going to do to the overall theming of the park. I know it's going to make the theme park more popular. Dino Land USA was already an on the cheap land. And now, when you're throwing in Encanto, which is one of the most popular franchises Disney has had in the past 20 years, it is going to be a big deal. People love Indiana Jones as well, so that's going to be a big deal. Even though I love Dinosaur, I do think that it might be past its prime and people might be ready for a little bit of a change there. The only thing that might not hurt it about the change to Tropical Americas is that Dino Land USA, with the exception of Dinosaur the Ride, wasn't really about what it was supposed to be about in the first place because they ended up going on the cheap and creating this carnival attraction venue when I think if it focused more on real dinosaurs and it focused more on how the dinosaurs went extinct and how we don't want to follow them, not that the dinosaurs made mistakes, but we don't want to create an artificial end to the
Hmm.
world that would replicate what happened to the dinosaurs. We don't want to do our own extinction event. That probably would have been worse to replace that with Encanto. But with what was there, it might not be that big of a deal. And if they are thinking about that overall theme, it might not be that bad.
Yeah, and I think this is where I'll get a little in deeper because Dino Land from the outset, like you said, was on the cheap. It didn't really go into the conservation. It had elements of it, right? It was about, this carnival comes in and takes over the land and, all that kind of stuff. So the elements are there, but you have to be looking for it. And I think it's the same thing with Everest. There are a lot of elements about how these hikers are mistreating the mountain. They're, disrespecting it. They're littering. There's all these things happening, but you have to be looking for it. And it's really ironic that people now leave their hairbands all over the Everest ride. I mean, really, there's some strange audience participation going on there. But this element of subtle theming has been part of the park for a while. And I think that's what we're going to see more of. I think that there will be nods to it throughout tropical Americas because I can't imagine they give it up altogether. But I think it is going to be a thing where, similar to Pandora, you do kind of have to be looking for it and making those connections and digging into the park itself, which the average park goer is not going to do. But if you're talking Dino Land to Tropical Americas, like you said, the theme wasn't that ingrained to the land in the first place. So it's not really like you're losing a large part of that theming. And there is potential that they could go even more into it. It's hard to know.
And I think that's a great point when you talk about, will the people pay attention? Will the average guest pay attention? Because the big comment about Disney's Animal Kingdom in the past was that, oh, it's just a glorified zoo. Well, those were the people who weren't getting that original theming anyway. So when we talk about the overall theme of Disney's Animal Kingdom, or we talk about the overall theme of Epcot, or the overall theme of Disney's Hollywood Studios, when we talk about these things, we are talking about a small percentage of people who even, I don't usually give a damn. Like most people just don't care about that stuff. So as long as they're close, I think it's going to be enough for the average person. And that's going to lead perfectly into the next two areas I'm going to mention. And I wanted to talk about these two at the same time because there's a lot in common with them. So, the Oasis, as you enter, there's going to be no changes to that. So, we're kind of skipping that here. That's great. I don't think anybody has a problem with the Oasis. You get to see some animals every once in a while. Divine is there. That's really cool. But I'm talking specifically about Conservation Station, which you would take the train from the Africa section out to Conservation Station. And now they have put an animation experience out there. So, yes, you can still see animals being evaluated by the vets there and the vet techs, but you can also learn how to draw Zazu. And then Discovery Island, which is where the Tree of Life rests, and there's some incredible walking trails, and you can see some kangaroos, you can see otters, you can see a bunch of different animals on Discovery Island. But really, most people rush through Discovery Island to either see the show inside the Tree of Life or to maybe see the bird show, which is really, really good, or they're rushing over to Nomad Lounge, or they're eating at the barbecue place right there. So I think that the overall theming of Discovery Island gets missed anyway because they kind of just view it as a hub to move to whatever ride they're trying to go to now. And the one thing people did on Discovery Island was the show in the Tree of Life, which was a show for It's Tough to Be a Bug. And now it is a show about Zootopia. And this is probably the biggest mistake, I think, to the overall theming and the biggest threat to the overall theming because you'll even see now because there is a new show and anything new draws a lot of people. So now they're shutting down some of the walking trails just to add queue for this new Zootopia show. We've always talked about how Joe Rody didn't want anthropomorphized animals that were supposed to be people. They've broken that rule now. Yes, it appears to have a very impressive animatronic, but It's Tough to Be a Bug had a very impressive animatronic. So, what are your thoughts on both Conservation Station and how that's sort of been moved away from the conservation focus, and then really big on Discovery Island?
Yeah, I think Conservation Station, honestly, I think the addition of the animation drawing area is a positive because I think a lot of people skipped it. And I think now when you tell people like, oh, you can go sit inside for like 20 minutes and learn how to draw Zazu, people are a little more inclined to be like, oh yeah, maybe we'll take the kids over and do that. And while they're there, then they end up going into the medical center. They learn a little bit more, hopefully. Um, and so I think it's good in terms of getting people there because I think a lot of people did just go right by it.
Well, and I was just going to say there's also the petting zoo out there. And
Hmm.
inevitably, if you take the kids out to draw Zazu, then they're going to go to the petting zoo because there's no way you're keeping your kids away from that. Just please make sure they wash their hands on the way out.
Yes, 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 yes. Please, soap and water, wash the hands. Um, in terms of Discovery Island, I think it's tough because I think it could be so much worse than it is. You know, like if this is how we get Zootopia, fine. We could be getting a whole Zootopia land. It could be so on such a larger scale. And it was rumored to be that for so long that a part of me is like breathing a sigh of relief that this is ultimately what we ended up with. Do I think it fits thematically? Not a chance. Not in the slightest. Like you said, anthropomorphic animals as like the main attraction, not it. Um, even Festival of the Lion King, most of those animals are portrayed by humans in the show, so it's still a different situation and they're still like ultimately animals dealing with like animal things as opposed to Zootopia is using animals as a metaphor for humans. I say this as, Lion King is Hamlet, but you get my point. I don't love that it ended up in the park. I really don't love that it's closing trails, even though that's temporary and it will die down. I think that the Discovery Island trails are such an important part of the park, especially to appreciate the Tree of Life and all the animals that are carved into it, which are just so beautiful.
But
Yeah, that one.
I also want to make a point here though. You say it's temporary because Zootopia is new. But think about how many other things have been new, and we're like, well, it'll die down eventually. And we're still dealing with hour-long waits for Runaway Railway and the Ratatouille ride and these things that we thought were going to be hour waits for the first couple months. and then they would die down when they've been here for a while. And it just doesn't feel like they're dying down anymore. It feels like these things are staying that popular, especially as we deal with some problems in the economy right now. I don't think people are going to Disney. Maybe they would go once a year, and now they're going every other year. So these things are staying new to these people for a little longer than they did in the past. And obviously, I'm not saying everybody goes to Disney every year. I'm just saying that the people who would go every year might now only be going every other year, and that then the people who only go every other year are only going every 4 years or whatever. So I think that we are seeing these new attractions take up more and more space and be popular for longer stretches. So it could impact Discovery Island for longer than that. But now that we have covered basically the whole park and we've gone around and talked about these things, do you feel there is an impact on the original theme of the park, or were they off the mark from the beginning and
You
it's
know,
only sort of staying off the mark?
I think it has strayed slightly. Um, I don't think it's strayed catastrophically. I don't think this is an instance of, like Hollywood studios where you're going, this is a completely different park. 90% of this is not what the original theme was intended to be. I do feel like overall Animal Kingdom is still Animal Kingdom, and you do still have a lot of conservation, a lot of focus on animals. Now, of course, we have, a whole new giant land opening, and I think that will decide a lot of this. I think there is a lot riding on that land being able to pull off that balance of IP and park theme, like Pandora did, and now not having Joe Rohde at the helm. It's I'm a little less confident in it than I would be otherwise.
Well, one of the points that I want to build off from what you just said was not having Joe Rohde involved. And really, the first big thing that we saw added to Animal Kingdom that didn't have Joe Rohde involved was the Zootopia attraction. And they named one of the characters after Joe Rohde and based it off of him, which is kind of showing their tone deafness because he didn't want something like that. Now, maybe he's changed his mind. I don't know. But it just feels like because they named that animal after him, it kind of showed that they don't really know what they're doing here. And that's not a good sign. I'm going to say, in my humble opinion, the theme of Disney's Animal Kingdom, the purpose of Disney's Animal Kingdom being a park about conservation, trying to have people learn something and trying to have people take lessons from the theming of the theme park, from Maharaja Jungle Trek, from Gorilla Falls Trek, from Kilimanjaro Safari, Conservation Station, all of these things. It was based on the willingness of the guest to want to be immersed in this theming, to want to go to Tiffin's and look at some of the pictures from different places where the Imagineers went to come up with the theming of these lands, and to look at some of the carved images in the pylons. And it was on the guest to get out of Disney's Animal Kingdom what they personally wanted to get out of it. If you want to go to Disney's Animal Kingdom and you want to ride Pandora rides, Expedition Everest, and the Encanto ride, and then leave, you're going to leave thinking that it's a half day park. And if you want to walk around all of the trails, you're going to think it's a 2 day park out of your vacation. And if you're an annual pass holder, you're just going to spend all day at Nomad Lounge and not even go to see any of this other stuff. So you're going to be like, how can people say this is only a half day park? You got to spend at least 5 hours at Nomad Lounge every day. So I think what I'm getting at here is we love Disney's Animal Kingdom and we love Disney theming and we love to look into all these small little details. But that's not how everybody enjoyed the park. And I think if you want to enjoy those little details, they're still there. And you can still find the details, and they're still going to find ways in the new attractions to give you those things. But the majority of people aren't going to see that theming anyway. And they could have the most incredibly themed park in the history of time, and people aren't going to see it. There are so many people who don't know about the Discovery Island trails, and those are probably the best part of Animal Kingdom.
Yeah. And I do think that there's something to be said for the average park goer being more incentivized to go to Animal Kingdom and maybe spend a full day in Animal Kingdom once the Tropical Americas lands opens. And if they're incentivized to say, like, oh, we want to do these 6 different rides in Animal Kingdom, so now we have to spend a whole day here because of how the lightning lanes are working out and how the lines are, then maybe they will end up exploring a trail. Maybe they will end up going to learn something. Maybe they'll notice a detail that'll inspire them to look more closely at things. And I think that that can only be considered a net positive for the park.
And I know with going to the different park based ticketing structures that they have gone to in recent years, where a lot of the time, now this will probably change once Tropical Americas opens, but having Animal Kingdom be a cheaper park, most days being the cheapest park, is a positive because let's say you go to Animal Kingdom and you know it's going to close at 6 or 7, so it can be your relaxed day, but you still put a full park day in there. It might incentivize you to get the non park hopper ticket because it's cheap enough. And then that gives you the motivation to want to walk around the trails. And I think, I don't know if there's two people more qualified to talk on this. There's no better park to just get a frozen Coke and sit at a table and just look at the atmosphere than Animal Kingdom. You don't always have to be doing something. You
Right.
can just sit down and enjoy a theme park.
Absolutely. And I hope that with the new land, we get longer hours.
They have to. That would be almost I don't like using these words for stuff like theme parks, but that would almost be a travesty if they kept it
Yep.
closing at 6 o'clock with a brand new land. Maz, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. This was great.